What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Steven Thompson, here with my partner Jack Markowski after the Pitt Panthers fell 69-62 on the road to the Clemson Tigers. Another big opportunity left on the table. The Panthers, their NCAA tournament hopes are on life support. We'll get to that soon, but they just went ice cold in a big game, and they lay another egg on the road when they really needed a big-time win. And uh, just an ugly, ugly, brutal loss. I mean, I guess not as ugly as Wake Forest, but still just a really tough pill to swallow. Arguably even tougher than Wake Forest, just because of the way of how much season they have left, and just the way this happened. I mean, they had a chance. They were in this game all the way to the very end, and just couldn't find the bottom of the net enough. I guess we'll start there, Jack. Where did the offense go? I mean, it's hard to look at these numbers and blame anything besides Pitt's ability to make shots from the field.
Yeah, anytime you shoot 32.8% from the field and 28 from behind the arc, you probably aren't going to win. Like you said, they were in it until the end, and it's a miracle that it was that close, honestly, with how they performed, especially in the second half. They started the first half on fire, too. They scored 23 points in the first 10 and a half minutes. I think they hit like 4 or 5 threes up to that point and just fell apart from there. I mean, you do have to give credit to Clemson's defense, great on-ball defense. They tightened up inside the perimeter and really forced Pitt to take some bad shots from that area of the floor. And when you're an offense that's surrounded around jump shooting, especially from three-point range, those shots aren't falling, and you don't have your best guy in Blake Hinson, operating at 100%. Essentially, it's not a winning formula, and that's what happened tonight. That's what happened against Wake Forest. And yeah, I mean, it was just a complete stinker. Just a lack of off-ball movement too. I thought there wasn't a ton of creativity. I didn't think that they made a ton of adjustments inside the game either to really remedy their struggles. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough look. You just have to sort of wash your hands and move on. But there's something to be said that against two, tough NCAA tournament opponents in back-to-back games on the road, that they've just completely disappeared. So yeah, they have to turn it around and quickly.
Yeah, I think you made a good point about how Clemson kind of adjusted and Pitt wasn't able to adjust to the adjustments. I mean, in the first half, Pitt was getting layup lines to the rim. They weren't really being contested at all. They had so many opportunities that they just kind of left at the rim. They got covered for by the fact that I think they made 5 threes before they made their first layups. I think they were 5 of 6 from the field, from 3-point range to start, and then 5 for shooting layups, before Blake Hinson got one to fall. But I think, in the second half, Clemson definitely pressured the ball a lot more, made it more uncomfortable for them to get to the rim, made it more difficult for guys to get to their spots. And when a team's playing one-on-one like that, and another team just tightens up their individual defense, you can kind of connect the dots from there. And then Pitt, I just felt like their free throw shooting wasn't horrible, but they missed 5 in a game they lost by 7. You can connect some dots there as well. You're going to look at the missed jumpers and everything like that, and those weren't really the killer. I felt like it was in the first half when they were just letting bunnies roll off the rim, when they weren't, converting dunks, when they weren't just converting those easy looks inside the rim. I think I said to myself at the beginning, man, if they lose this game, and it didn't really seem inevitable at that point, but I think looking back, you could have kind of thought to yourself, wow, missing that many attempts from that close a range in this tight of a game is really going to cost you. And in this big of a game against a team that is that experienced, and is that tough, and is that resilient, Clemson really made them pay, and Pitt couldn't really do this quite the same thing. I think that's the other end of this is Pitt played pretty good defense, I thought. They forced 11 turnovers. The offensive rebounded pretty well too. Like, they had opportunities to, even when they weren't making shots, to turn Clemson's mistakes into their advantage, and they didn't do that. That's something that this team, which I think is better defensively than they are offensively, had done all season long. That's how they kind of buoyed their offense, and there were just almost no transition opportunities that they took advantage of. There were no fast break opportunities that they took advantage of. And for a team like this is killer. I mean, I think they're talented, but as we've seen, they're prone to long scoring droughts, and when they can't turn offense into defense, things really start to get ugly for them on the offensive end. You mentioned that. I mentioned it a little bit. You referenced it, but two big duds on the road for a team that had been so good on the road all season and at really inopportune times. Pitt at one point had the second best road record in the ACC, and when we get down to these final 6 or 7 games, you circled at Wake Forest, you circled at Clemson. You said if they want to make the NCAA tournament, and we're going to get to that, we're going to talk about their odds in a second. But you thought they needed those 2 games to really get themselves safely in the fields, and we arrive at game day, and it doesn't seem like the Panthers brought their A game in either of those contests. I mean, certainly not in a 33-point loss to Wake Forest, and then again tonight, just not on the same level as. I mean, I would actually argue even Clemson didn't bring their A game, but Pitt needed this game more. This game was certainly more important to Pitt's postseason hopes than it was to Clemson's, and Pitt didn't come up with the necessary buckets, with the necessary, I guess, mental fortitude that we saw them play with at Duke, at Virginia, even at I'd say Georgia Tech, and at West Virginia, a team that loves to kind of be hated and to be the villain in a road environment. Didn't really have a ton of juice, it felt like, tonight, and didn't bring their best. Where do you feel like how can you explain these road struggles for a team that had been so good away from the Peterson Event Center this season?
Yeah, it sort of feels like it came out of nowhere. And I know after the Wake Forest loss, we were wondering if that performance was a fluke or not. And I feel like a game like this kind of tells you it may not have been. Now, they're still a good team, I think. There's a reason that they have 6 road wins, which is, up there among the leaders in the nation or close to it. 2 of their 4 worst shooting performances of the season have come against Wake Forest and Clemson. They've prided themselves on their ability to go into, opposing territory, and, coming away with tough wins. And they've fallen completely short in 2 huge opportunities where, I mean, you look, if they had just won one of them, where they would be on the bubble right now, where they would be in NCAA tournament discussions, even in the ACC standing. So it's a tough look. Like you said, I don't feel like they brought their A game. It feels like they were frustrated. They became more frustrated as the game went on. Their shots weren't falling. You could tell that it just wasn't their night, and it wasn't their night against Wake Forest either. It's always hard to expect, teams to go out on the road and win against tough NCAA tournament caliber teams like Wake Forest and Clemson are. But I feel like you also should expect the Panthers to perform better than they have, especially with what they've shown over the past, 10 games or so. So it's rough. I think I don't know where they go from here. Obviously, they have one more road game against Boston College, not an opponent that's on the same level as a Wake Forest or Clemson. But I think that gives them a chance to really regroup, find themselves again going into the ACC tournament, where, of course, all of those games are road games technically at neutral sites. So the road mojo is gone a little bit. It's tough, of course. Like I said, that hurts the resume. These 2 losses, or it's more of a missed opportunity. I mean, there's not much more else to say. It's just kind of a tough look for them.
Yeah, it's disappointing, certainly. And I think it's no coincidence. I mean, I don't think Clemson is a notoriously tough road environment. I think you can say the same thing about the environment that met them at Wake Forest too. I mean, I watched them play Duke a little bit, and that crowd was electric, but it was not the same crowd that showed up when Pitt came to town for obvious reasons. But I think this team, which loved to play in places like Duke, places like Virginia, this team likes being the villain to a certain extent. And I think when they don't really have a crowd that's antagonizing them at their back, they are really not kind of the same team. I mean, I think we've clearly seen that. I mean, that's just kind of a working theory, but I mean, I think you can make some connections between how well they played against a team like Duke, where the crowd was all on top of them. They were in this vaunted environment. Their backs were against the walls, and they really played their best game of the season, it felt like, and the same thing against Virginia. But then you look at, you know, games like, Wake Forest and a pretty quiet gym. Even the beginning of the Georgia Tech game, I remember that is not a notoriously, loud environment either. The Miami game comes to mind as well. I think this Pitt team kind of counts on some energy from the crowd. They're not particularly great at creating their own energy, which is something that older teams are good at, and this is a pretty young team. That's kind of my theory, but like you said, it's hard to explain a little bit. It feels like it came out of nowhere, and You hope it's a fluke, but I mean, two games like this in a row and two kind of big I don't want to call them letdowns, but two big duds on the road, and you got to start asking the question of is this who this team really is? And that's the thing. This team has been so up and down all season. It's hard to really get a grip on who they are and who they are at their true selves. You mentioned this when we were talking about the offense as well, but not a great night for Blake Hinson shooting the basketball. 6 points on 2 of 9 shooting from the field. The Panthers are now 1-6 in ACC play when Blake Hinson scores under 15 points. You know, uh, this is true of just about every team in college basketball. If not every team, it's true of about 90% of the teams in college basketball. But when your best player is operating at a third of the capacity, if we're going by points per game. I mean, Hinson averages 18 per game. He puts up 6 tonight and only 1 rebound too. I think that's notable to point out. There just wasn't really an area of the game where Hinson was particularly effective. He fouled a lot too, picked up 3 fouls all in the second half. Where do you think the struggles kind of emanated from for Hinson? And I mean, is it even possible for Pitt to win a game when he's shooting the way he did tonight against Clemson?
Yeah, it's a great question because earlier in the season this was more of an issue, but when he was cold, like the offense couldn't perform at all. That was especially prevalent towards the start of ACC play. And again, it's not a coincidence that they stagnated tonight when he wasn't playing up to his usual level. It was his first game in 2 months since against Purdue Fort Wayne, where he finished without a three. It was also his lowest point total with 6, like you said, since that game as well. So, I think a lot of his struggles came from additional pressure. He has seen a lot of, different defensive looks all season, but it feels like, defenders have been more tight on him out on the perimeter. He's not getting, quality looks really consistently at all from that part of the floor. And I feel like a lot of his aggressiveness and driving towards the rim, like we saw against teams like Virginia and Louisville, has gone. He had 1 or 2 layups tonight, but overall, he's just not really used in that capacity. Doesn't seem like he's maybe comfortable necessarily with doing that. And I think that comes down to the way Clemson played inside the perimeter as well. But yeah, the team largely runs through him when he's not on. Neither is the team during this hot stretch too. They found ways to get their ancillary pieces to step up and make an impact on the offensive end, and they did get that out of Carrington and Leggett tonight for the most part. But otherwise, it was rough. And like you sort of said, the Panthers, I don't think, have the scoring depth just all around the roster to really make up for a poor Hinson game. I think that's just the reality of the situation, especially since there's no interior scoring presence that really clogs, shots up for everybody on the roster, including Hinson. So you have to hope that he turns it around. You knew that he couldn't stay hot forever and keep up the pace that he had previously. But the Panthers don't have much of a chance when he plays this way. So, when he does, it's a bad sign.
Yeah, and I think the good news is, I mean, he usually doesn't play this way. I mean, out of, I guess they played 27 games now. He only has, I want to say, 7 or 8 where he scores under 15 points. So this is not a regular occurrence. It's concerning when it does happen because it does seem to happen at the wrong times. I mean, happened against Wake Forest, happened here tonight, 2 of their bigger games of the season. But I mean, that's just Blake Hinson too. I mean, he shows up in the biggest games as well. I mean, think about West Virginia, you think about Duke, you think about Virginia. Um, this is just kind of the deal you've made with the devil, a little bit. You live and die by Blake Hinson, and I mean, he's your best player, so you should. But there's also a bit of a chicken and egg thing here. Guillermo Diaz-Graham wasn't knocking down threes like he usually does, or at least at the rate that he has over the course of this season. Jalen Lowe did not have a good shooting night outside of the first, especially out of the first, 5 or so minutes. He started hot and finished with just 11 points on 3 of 10 shooting. Carrington was good as well, but, an inefficient 15 points from Ish Leggett as well, only 1 of 6 from 3. As a team outside of Hinson, they were just 7 of 21 from 3-point range. And I feel like when, like you said, the ancillary pieces aren't working as well, Hinson, it's easier to defend Hinson. It's easier to zero in on him. And then he has to do some really special things to keep this team afloat. And he wasn't able to do that tonight. He's not going to be able to do that every night. Clemson did a good job selling out to deny him the ball. and no one else made him pay. So like I said, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Like, was the rest of the team bad because Hinson wasn't freeing them up for shots because he was drawing so much attention? Was Hinson so bad because no one else was making shots to draw some attention away from him? I mean, who really knows? But I think it all gets back to the same place, which is Pitt can't afford nights like this from Hinson, from their best player, from their superstar, and this is what he signed up for as well, to be the leader, to be the best player on this team. But they can't afford nights like this from him, especially in the biggest games. Like I said, they've only won one ACC game, and that was Georgia Tech, where he scored fewer than 15 points, and he scored 9 in that game. It's difficult. It's an uphill battle for Pitt to win this way, and you can't expect Hinson to carry them in every game. That said, I mean, you need something else from the other guys as well. Like you said, there's no interior scoring punch. It's like it wasn't particularly efficient, even though Zach Austin hit a couple threes. Him taking 7 shots, that's kind of a lot for a team that needs Jalen Lowe, that needs a night like that from Bub Carrington too. Like I don't think that's particularly necessary, but he's the only reason that this was close at all in the first place. So a rough night from Hinson, and obviously a rough night from him for Pitt from there. I did mention Bub Carrington. You did as well. I mean, if we want to talk some positives, it was a really good game, I thought, from Carrington. I thought he was all over the floor. He was scoring. He was rebounding. He defended really well, too. I think this was a bit of a glimpse into what we could see from Bub next year. Obviously, Blake Hinson's going to move on. You'd have to assume Carrington's going to take a step up in terms of how many shots he's taking. I felt like he was good in just about every facet of the game, and if there was, I don't know, if this team shoots a little bit better, I would love if we had some tracking data as far as like in the NBA they track potential assists. I want to know how many passes Carrington had that could have led to a bucket if someone makes an open shot. He was really good tonight, and I thought all over the floor. What did you make of Carrington tonight? Let's hit on at least one positive before we leave.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, he made an impact in every aspect of the game. And the thing for me with Carrington is that he doesn't always shoot well. There's some inconsistencies with how efficient he is. But I think with a freshman like him, where that the talent is there to be a consistent scorer, seeing him be such a force on the boards as a playmaker defensively, I think that's more positive than if it was the opposite, where he was, scoring a ton but not making an impact in other aspects of the game. So yeah, I mean, he was 5 of 12. 18 points, 5 of 6 from the line, 3 of 4 from behind the arc, which, that's a huge positive for him. He struggled from that area for a lot of the season. So like you said, I mean, he really, found open guys. Pitt wasn't hitting shots all night. But I think he's, he really is the only positive, or one of the only positives you can take out of tonight. It's a good sign. I think it bodes well for the future. And yeah, I mean, I think you have to come away super impressed. He put them up 4 with those threes on back-to-back possessions with about 9 minutes left in the second half, and that was really their last hurrah. And he also made Pitt's only 2 3-pointers of the second half. So you have to tip your hat to him. Hope it's a building block for the future for the rest of the season. And yeah, I think it was a definitely a good performance for him after a Virginia Tech game where he's, sat most of the first half, didn't really get to get his money's worth, if you would say.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I mean, the fact that he was able to stay on the floor, defend so well without fouling, I think that's something that he's still learning to do, but he did really well tonight. And I think you mentioned those 2 big threes that he hit. We've seen, Jalen Lowe hit some shots like that, and to see the other freshman guard kind of step up, his counterpart, his teammate, his running mate in the backcourt, do kind of the same thing in a big spot in a big game, was impressive too, and like you said, a good sign for the future. Speaking of Jalen Lowe, though, not his best night like we've highlighted, but he also didn't play for the final 4.5 minutes of this game, during which Pitt, I mean, obviously it was the final 4:30 of the game, so it did kind of seal the loss for them, but Pitt didn't score. They didn't make a field goal in the final 3 minutes of the game. Do you question the move to pull Jalen Lowe, who's been one of this team's best shot makers, even though he was having a rough night from the field so late in the game when offense was really at a premium?
Yeah, I thought it was a curious move for sure, especially since we've seen him step up in late game situations like Duke and NC State come to mind right away. But it also wasn't his night. I don't necessarily blame Cable for sitting him down for the last 4.5 minutes to close the game. He had the worst plus minus. Now, I don't know how much stock you really want to put into that. But he did shoot 3 of 10 on the night. Wasn't making as much of an impact, running the offense. I think it sort of stagnated with him at the helm. That's not his fault solely, but still. And yeah, I mean, I think it could have been for defensive reasons. We've seen him sort of struggle on that end of the floor at times this year. So, if it wasn't working tonight, I think, even if the offense wasn't performing up to its, usual level for most of the game with him in there, I still think he runs the offense, or he gives you the best option as the team's primary ball handler. So I do question that decision a little bit. But I guess with Bub, playing as well as he did, maybe it makes more sense. They had to go a little bigger, even with the bigs in foul trouble, because of what Shefflin and Hall were doing. He was the odd man out. I think it might just be as simple as that.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, not his best night offensively, but I think, you play the numbers a little bit. In a situation like that, you leave your best shooters on the floor, you leave your most talented shot makers on the floor when offense is at a premium. I think it was I'll put it this way. I think it was a curious move, but I think it's defensible, Like, look, I don't think leaving Low in would have changed the game. I don't think it would have really brought Pitt back. So to that end, I mean, leaving Zach Austin in for him, giving you some better rebounding, um, some better defenses, some better defense. And I mean, Austin didn't shoot that much more poorly than Lowe did tonight. So if you're talking about playing the numbers, I mean, Zach Austin was 2 of 5 from three tonight. Lowe was 1 of 3, and Austin, his last 3-pointer came on a last second heave at the end of the game. So I mean, if you're playing numbers in that way, I mean, Austin technically gave you a better scoring night, a better offensive night, and he gave you some rebounding and and he gives you some length on defense against Scheffelen and Hall, who kind of heated up in the final few minutes, especially on the glass. So, like I said, not completely unreasonable. Maybe not what I would have done. I'm not really sure, but a defensible decision, and maybe one that we're going to look back at as inconsequential in the long run. And we finally got here, as we do as we have done, and basically at the conclusion of every post game report over the last few weeks, we're talking about their NCAA tournament odds. They took a big hit tonight, not really necessarily because of the loss individually, but because of the missed opportunity, which is really the theme of the night: missed opportunities in every facet. But what do you make of Pitt's NCAA tournament odds after a loss to Clemson? They've got 3 games left at Boston College, home against Florida State and NC State, and then at least one more game in the ACC tournament. What do you make of the Panthers' odds of making the big dance at this point?
Yeah, like you said, if tonight was a huge missed opportunity. If they had won, they set themselves up beautifully for the last 3 regular season games. Or if they won those 3, I think they would have been in the tournament. They still have a chance. They're going to fall off, like the next 4 outline. But if they do find a way to win their last 3, and they probably need to get 1 or 2 of those pretty convincingly, and then win 1 or 2 games in the ACC tournament, I still think they have a pretty good case. But they just can't afford a slip up. And we've said that before. But now the razor, or the margin for error, is truly razor thin at this point. So it's not a great outlook anymore. I don't know if it was coming into the game. But yeah, they have to be perfect down the stretch. I don't think it's in, like auto bid territory where they have to go out and win the ACC tournament in order to reach the dance. But it's pretty close. So, I think the biggest thing for them is taking care of business, not looking ahead at this point, and just taking it game by game, and hoping it sorts itself out. And they also need help in other areas from other teams. Have to hope some other bubble teams falter along the way. So yeah, it's a little bit of a rough position to be in for sure.
Yeah. They're not dead yet, but they are on life support. These were really the only 2 games that you could afford to lose, that being, these 2 being Wake Forest and Clemson. If you were going to slip up at any point down the stretch, it's, I guess, the bright side is that you did it in these 2 games against 2 quad one opponents on the road, two teams that are likely headed to the NCAA tournament. But yeah, like you said, I mean, you can't lose again. You can't lose again in the regular season. You can't lose before probably the semifinals of the ACC tournament either. I think they're locked into that single bye. I'll have to double check that, but you're going to need at least one more marquee win, and that's either going to come against Virginia, Duke, Wake Forest, or North Carolina, depending on how the bracket shakes out. And these last few weeks, this last week and a half, excuse me, of the standings shake out. But I'm not going to bury them yet. I mean, this is a team that we talked about, following the Wake Forest loss, following that Virginia Tech win, that this is a team that picks himself off the mat pretty well. They're a team that responds to adversity pretty well. And so, in some ways, this is a good spot for them to be in, kind of in a place where no one's paying attention to them. Everyone is probably writing them off at this point. Everyone's doubting them. This is where this team likes to be. So we'll see if they actually end up playing some of their best ball down the stretch and uh, getting back to form and keeping their NCAA tournament hopes truly alive. Because to be quite honest, a loss in any of these final three games probably does put them in auto bid territory if they want to make the big dance. They know what the job is, and the job is right in front of them. They'll lick their wounds after this loss to Clemson. They'll head back to Pittsburgh, I would assume, or just head straight up to Boston. But either way, they've got one more road game against Boston College before they close out the regular season with two at home. Jack and I will be here to cover it all for you. Want to appreciate you all for tuning in to another Inside Pitt post-game report. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers, and follow all of our reporting at InsideThePanthers.com. Appreciate you all tuning in, and we'll see you next time.